So I want to talk about a potentially controversial topic, and that is how Ferrari, looking from the outside at least, seem to have got away with cheating. Following the engine regulation clarifications during 2019, the team fell back considerably, and in 2020, their issues only got worse. So did the Ferrari team cheat and get away with it? Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. So this video will consider a number of different aspects. I'll first analyse just how much speed the Ferrari team lost in 2020 compared to 2019. I'll then review the FIA statement following their investigation in 2020. And then finally I'll take a look at some of the latest comments from the FIA steward and former Ferrari driver Salo, who's revealed some interesting new facts that could help me work out whether Ferrari got away with cheating the fuel flow rate regulations. But just in case you didn't know about the fuel flow gate situation, I'll cover it quickly. Back in 2019, Ferrari had the best power unit on the grid, and after the summer break, the team took pole position 6 times in a row from Belgium to Mexico. In addition, between the two drivers, they took 3 wins at these events, including a 1-2 finish in Singapore. Now this was an impressive run of form, and suspicions were raised amongst the other teams, with Red Bull lodging a rule clarification request regarding the fuel flow into the engine. The fuel flow in the engines is capped at a rate of 100 kilograms of fuel per hour, and is measured by sensors that check this rate at a set interval. Red Bull's request was regarding an idea by delivering a power boost by manipulating the fuel flow to provide additional power between these checks by the fuel flow sensor, thus running the engine with additional fuel, in a way cheating the sensor. The FIA came back to this request and publicly made it known that this method would not be legal, with clarification coming in advance of the 2019 US Grand Prix. Subsequently, just after this run of 6 pole positions in a row, Ferrari lost that pace that they had before relative to their rivals, which only raised suspicions even more regarding whether the team were cheating these regulations. How much time did Ferrari lose? It's quite tricky to quantify just how much the Ferrari team lost in 2020 compared to 2019. But by taking a look at this, it could shine some light as to how much of an advantage this potential cheating was giving them in 2019. So the first real comparison point when looking at 2019 versus 2020 is the first competitive qualifying times. I'm going to look at a few of these examples to give a view of the time lost. First, I'll look at Austria, as it was the first chance to compare the times from 2019 to 2020. Back in 2019, Charles Leclerc took pole position with a Q3 time of a 1 minute 3.003, whereas in 2020, Leclerc managed just a 1 minute 3.923. This shows a loss of 9/10 of a second from 2019 to 2020 over one of the shortest laps on the F1 calendar. Now of course there will have been subtle differences in the conditions and the track temperatures, which makes the direct comparisons nearly impossible. But to have lost 9/10 in a year over a 1 minute and 3 second lap time is huge. In the speed trap, Leclerc set a speed of 325.7 km per hour in 2019 and was top of the standings. But in 2020 he dropped to last with a speed of just 312.4 km an hour, which is a drop of 4%. Vettel meanwhile set a speed of 321.5 km per hour in 2019 to 313.2 km in 2020, which is a drop of 2.5%. So either way, a big drop on power year on year. Next up, I want to look at Monza, a circuit that's massively dependent on the car's power unit, as the cars run a minimal downforce and need to extract as much speed as possible through a lap. In 2019, Charles Leclerc took pole and Vettel qualified in 4th, with times of a 1 minute 19.307 and a 1 minute 19.457 respectively. Whereas in 2020, the Ferrari drivers struggled for power, and Vettel was even knocked out of qualifying during Q1. Vettel's lap time was a 1 minute 21.151, and Leclerc set a 1 minute 20.273 after being knocked out of the session in Q2. So Vettel's gap was almost 1.7 seconds, and Leclerc's gap was just under a second. So to lose that amount of time from one year to another shows just how much power the team had lost, which is assumed to be as a direct result of the engine producing less power. However, Salo's comments, which I'll get onto later, do offer an alternative explanation. In terms of the speed trap times at Monza, in 2019 Leclerc was the fastest Ferrari, with a speed of 349.7 km per hour. But come 2020, Leclerc's speed was 339.1 km per hour, a drop of 10.6 km per hour in a year. That's 3%. Vettel was much the same, from 346.0 to 334.5, a drop of 11.5 kilometers per hour, or in other words, a drop of 3.3%. Now this doesn't sound like much, and of course there are other factors, like whether a driver had a toe on a given lap, that could make a difference to their speed. But losing 3% of your speed from one year to another when the regulations were fairly stable shows just how much the Ferrari power unit had lost. With all of this though, it must be acknowledged that the car designers in Formula 1 designed cars based on the expected performance of the power unit. So in 2019, the designers will have assumed the power unit would be one of, if not the best on the grid, which of course means that they could balance the downforce versus drag conundrum that all car designers face. However, in 2020, they would have designed a car on the same principles, but given the sudden loss of power, the car had a huge amount of drag, which was one of the reasons that the car was so slow. Some other analysis was done by Mercedes during the 2020 season using GPS speed data, and that estimated that the Ferrari power unit was down on power by roughly 25 brake horsepower, or roughly 2.5% if you assume that the power units produce around 1000 horsepower. And this broadly matches the speed trap data. I think that what this shows is that the Ferrari car wasn't so far off the pace, but a small loss of power meant that the entire package was significantly worsened as a result. But either way, given all of the numbers were heading in the wrong direction from 2019 to 2020, it's quite clear that the FIA found some wrongdoing, which is the area that I'll look at next. But just before I get into what the FIA found in their investigation, I just wanted to take a moment to ask you to consider subscribing to Behind the Drive. I've got loads more content to come for 2021 and beyond. Thanks. The FIA findings. So following the initial clarifications of the fuel flow meter manipulation that was shared at the US Grand Prix in 2019, the FIA subsequently set up a further investigation into the power unit at the end of the season, which came to its conclusion in February of 2020. The headline from this statement from the FIA said that they'd reached a settlement with the team, but the specifics of the agreement would remain between the parties. In addition, a new double fuel flow sensor was introduced for the 2020 regulations, which would check the fuel flow rate in more than one location, ensuring that the situation would be clarified. On top of this, the Ferrari team boss Mattia Binotto denied any wrongdoing by Ferrari and claimed the team were not found to have broken the regulations. Now understandably, all 7 non-Ferrari powered teams lodged a joint communication to say that they were shocked and surprised that the investigation had not been made public. To this, the FIA responded in March, revealing that Ferrari firmly opposed the suspicions and reiterated that its power unit was always operating in compliance with the regulations, adding that the FIA was not fully satisfied, but due to the complexity of the investigation, there was a material impossibility to provide the unequivocal evidence of the breach. So there's a lot to unpick here. First, I think everyone can agree with the 7 teams that lodged the complaint. It's shocking that the initial reaction of the FIA was to try and just sweep this under the rug, when there's a possibility that one of their rival teams cheated during the previous season. And there's a mountain of circumstantial evidence that now points to this, given they'd fallen back after the technical clarifications had come through 2019, and then of course we saw that they were so slow during 2020. Then you have the FIA's response that essentially says that Ferrari have denied any wrongdoing and they don't believe them, but it would be too difficult to check and investigate their engine further. Now of course it's a complex issue and difficult to check, given it was quite clear that Ferrari could turn off the cheating following the clarification of the FIA back in 2019. But it does feel like there should have been some method that could at least steer them in the right direction. Off the top of my head, perhaps a request to run the engine in the way it was back during a qualifying session that is in question, for example, to see if Ferrari could match this in any way. Now I hope you've realised that I'm not exactly a technical mastermind by this point in the video, and I'm sure there are some reasons as to why this wouldn't be possible, but the statement just gives the feeling that they hadn't done enough. So this was the end of the matter from an FIA perspective. The settlement was well and truly locked away, not to be revealed, which was of course the case until Salo's comments in February of this year. Salo's comments. We're now back in 2021 in this story, and from the circumstantial evidence it certainly seems like Ferrari were caught and stopped in their tracks with regard to the power unit rule breaking. But from the outset, it didn't exactly look like they were punished for their actions, other than of course having a dreadful car in 2020, which we looked at earlier. But in terms of teams that have been caught cheating in the past, the FIA hasn't been afraid to take critical action. For example, the Spygate scandal in 2007, where the McLaren team were disqualified from the Constructors' Championship for copying the Ferrari car. Or back in 2005, when the BAR Honda team had their points taken away from them and a 2-race ban for being caught using a secondary fuel tank within the car. These were very public punishments and everyone was aware of what had happened. But on this occasion, it looks like Ferrari have managed to get away scot-free, considering their cheating couldn't be proven. However, Salo, who raced for Ferrari as a stand-in for Michael Schumacher in 1999 and is now an FIA steward, may have revealed some evidence that the Ferrari team were indeed punished. Talking in a Twitch stream interview, he said that Ferrari-powered cars suffered from Ferrari's cheat last year because they had Ferrari engines and were forced to use less fuel. And then when asked whether Ferrari would have a new engine for 2021, Salo responded by saying, "I don't know if it's a new engine, but they're allowed to use it to its full power," which suggests that the Ferrari-powered cars were restricted in some way during 2020. Now, it must be said that this was a casual interview hosted on Twitch. It wasn't exactly an official statement, so it could all be complete rubbish. Plus, Salo is a race steward for the FIA, so he wouldn't have been too close to the investigation itself. However, within the F1 paddock, people do talk, and he does of course work for the same organisation, so could have learned some information. And it does kind of make sense. All Ferrari teams suffered in 2020 because of the power unit losses, and perhaps this was because they couldn't run their engines to their maximum potential. It would certainly seem like an odd punishment to hand out, rather than taking their race results from 2019 away, but perhaps Ferrari wanted to avoid that public statement of guilt and instead took a punishment for the 2020 season to hamper their performances. So while it is odd, it isn't out of the realms of possibility. For me, I think the truth will come out in 2021. The Ferrari team have been talking about the fact that they're confident that they've regained 30 horsepower for this season, which if the Mercedes estimate was accurate, would imply that they've recovered back to where they'd been. So if they do go back to winning races and fighting at the front, then perhaps Salo's comments were accurate. Now, to answer the question of did Ferrari cheat and get away with it, well, I think there's certainly enough circumstantial evidence to say that Ferrari are probably more likely to have cheated than not. But as the FIA said, it's impossible to know for certain, and it seems like we'll never know whether they got away with it for sure. But if the cost of all their cheating was to run less fuel, perhaps they didn't get away with it after all. So that's my view on whether Ferrari have gotten away with cheating back in 2019. What's your thoughts? Let me know in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this video and watched this far, then please hit that like button and subscribe for more videos like this one in the future.